Hello and welcome to what should have been the last episode of GameHammer for 2017, although a very bad flu put a stop to that one. Since it was the final episode of 2017, I thought I would do what a lot of people are indulging in, and that's put together an annual Game of the Year show. And even though we're now in 2018, I'm still going to do it, because if I didn't, all of my game footage that I recorded would go to waste. This is an awards show with a difference, however, because we're not going to be looking at games that came out in 2017. We aren't even going to be looking at games that I reviewed in 2017, not specifically anyway. Instead, we're going back in time, back to 1985 to be exact, the year that I got my first home computer, and we're going to take a look at the top games of that year. The rules for the GameHammer Game of the Year for 1985 are simple. The game must have topped the charts in one of the three major magazines for the three major formats, and they must have done it in 1985. So, since we're in 1985, we're going to be looking at the major, most respected magazines for the major formats, which are the Amstrad CPC, the Commodore 64, and the mighty ZX Spectrum. Now, that could end up with us reviewing 36 games, and that's not going to happen. I'm sorry, but I do not have time to review 36 games one after the other. For a start, I haven't got the footage on my camera, so we're going to make a few extra rules. The rules are simple. I'm going to compile all of the #1 hit games from each of the magazines, and if there was any of those games that were #1 for more than 1 month, those games go through to the next round. And it's that round, with that shorter list, hopefully it is shorter, will be the one that determines which game is the #1 game for the year. And I'll only be reviewing the game on the format that it got to the #1 spot in. So if a game was #1 for 4 months on the Spectrum, but only 1 month on the Commodore, we'll only be reviewing the Spectrum version. And those rules mean we'll only be seeing multi-format comparisons where a game got to the top of the charts on more than one computer. Because the idea here is that I want to compare the games based on which were the best ones on that system. I'm not interested in whether a game was great on one system but not so great on another. I want to compare the games based on other good games for that system. This is a peer-to-peer comparison, at least for this round. Once we know the top game from each system, then those games will go head-to-head. Then we'll have one from the Spectrum, one from the Commodore, one from the Amstrad, and those three will go head-to-head to decide which game is the best game of 1985. So let's get started. We're going to start with the ZX Spectrum because it was the major system for the time, and because it's the most respected magazine for the format, we're going to be looking at Crash as the charts provider for the Spectrum. So let's get started. Crash began in February 1984, and by the start of 1985 it had already established itself as a major force in Spectrum gaming. It's well respected to this day, and that's why I've chosen it to represent the ZX Spectrum in the GameHammer Awards. Crash opened the year with a game everyone who's spent any time in retro circles should have heard of, Saberwolf by Ultimate. Saberwolf topped the charts in both the January and February issues of Crash, which gives it a spot in our contest. Next we have Nightlaw, also by Ultimate. This reached the #1 spot in March and stayed there through to May. It was knocked off the top spot in June by Everyone's a Wally, but that game only managed to stay in first place for 1 month, so while Nightlaw goes through to the next round, Wally Week's second outing sadly doesn't make the grade. Everyone's a Wally was replaced at #1 by Alien 8 in July, but that was quickly pushed aside by Beyond Software's Shadowfire in August. Shadowfire was then knocked off the top spot by Spy Hunter, but in an interesting twist, Spy Hunter was replaced by Shadowfire in the October issue, so Shadowfire goes through to the next round. November and December round out the year with 2 titles managing to claim the #1 spot. November saw Ocean's Hypersports hitting #1, but the Christmas top spot was taken by Melbourne House's Way of the Exploding Fist. Because these 2 titles only managed 1 #1 spot each, they miss out on a chance at the next stage. So, from the Crash charts, we have 3 games that are going forward to be contenders for GameHammer's Best Game of 1985. Those games are Saberwolf from Ultimate, Nightlaw, also from Ultimate, and Beyond Software's Shadowfire. This should be an interesting contest from the Spectrum camp. Next up, we'll be looking at the Commodore 64, since it was the second system for pretty much all of the 8-bit era here in the UK at least. And given the amount of love that was shown to this magazine, I had to choose Zap64 as the Commodore's magazine of choice for chart information. So, what topped the charts for the Commodore 64 in 1985? Let's have a look. Choosing Zap as the magazine of choice presented me with a few problems. It's the major, most influential magazine for the Commodore 64 in the UK, so it had to be this magazine I went with according to the rules. But there was a downside to that choice. Zap launched in May 1985, so what was I to do? Well, the thing about Zap64 is that its charts aren't based on sales figures, they're based on reader choice. So to some extent it wouldn't matter that there hadn't been a full year's worth of chart information, because the good games would get to the top regardless. Take Impossible Mission for example. The game was published in 1984, but it's the first game to top the chart twice, taking the #1 spot in both June and July of 1985 after knocking Boulder Dash off the top. So I'm gonna just go with the chart information that's available, because it should give us some good games to put into the next round. After Impossible Mission was knocked off #1 by Elite, Firebird's port of the BBC Micro Classic only managed to hold the top spot for August and September. Way of the Exploding Fist toppled Elite's crown in October, but it couldn't hold on to it. November and December 1985 both rounded out the year with Summer Games 2 at #1. An odd choice for the winter months, but that's readers' polls for you. So, that gives us another 3 games from the Commodore camp, all vying to be GameHammer's best game of 1985. Leading the charge for Team Commodore are Impossible Mission, Elite, and, strangely enough, Summer Games 2. That's quite a diverse selection of titles, so it's going to be a very interesting contest from the Commodore side. Now, let's take a look at the Amstrad CPC to round out our trinity of big hitters. For this system, as with all of the others, there really was only one choice to decide which magazine would represent the Amstrad. So, let's see which games topped the charts for the mighty Amstrad CPC in 1985 by looking at Amstrad Action. Oh dear, Amstrad Action launched in October 1985, making it the youngest of the major magazines for our 3 systems. As a result, even if we simply took the 3 highest selling games according to Amstrad Action's charts in order to get the 3 CPC games to go forward, we would still have a second major stumbling block. There's no chart in the first issue. So what are we to do? The answer is simple. Choose another magazine. But which one? Well, there's really only one choice. Let's take a look at the charts in Amstrad Computer User, the official magazine for the Amstrad CPC, and the magazine that Amstrad Action would soon come to stomp all over. It'll be useful for now. Oh, for goodness sake! As it turns out, Amstrad Computer User doesn't carry a chart every month. There's one in issue 4, which covers March 1985, and which references the positions of games in issue 3 as well, which does at least let us determine which games would be at the top spot for the charts of the first 3 months of the year, since issue 3 covered both January and February, what with ACU only going monthly from issue 4 onwards. However, after that there's no chart until issue 7. What's even more annoying is that it's a brand new chart and it doesn't list any previous positions for games. Oh well, we'll just have to go with what we have available, I suppose. Roland in the Caves starts the year off with a bang, having occupied the top of the charts for both January and February. This may have been due to the quirk of the magazine being bi-monthly, but since we have some issues with the charts with the CPC in 1985, I'll make an exception here. It goes through to the next round. In March, Roland in Time usurps the #1 spot, but after that we have no chart until June, and by then Sorcery has taken the top of the charts by storm, so sadly Roland in Time won't be joining us in the next stage. Neither will Sorcery, by the way, because in July, Night Law takes the #1 spot, and it will keep it right through until the end of September, because in the October 1985 issue, Ultimate's much-loved game is knocked from the top spot by Way of the Exploding Fist. This game has appeared in the charts for every format, but here on the CPC, it finally makes it through to the next round, having sat at the top of the chart in October, November, and December. Apparently the end of 1985 was a good time to be a fighting game on the CPC. So, once again, surprisingly enough, we have 3 games making it to the next round. And those games, of course, are Way of the Exploding Fist, Night Law, and Roland in the Caves. Now this is interesting because it's the first time that a first-party game has actually managed to get it into the contending section. I'm surprised by that, but Roland in the Caves is pretty good, so yeah, okay. we'll let it through. Will it take the prize, however? Well, we're still going to find out. Let's move on to the next round. So we have 3 games from each system to review, which is all nice and neat. I can't imagine this is going to be the same case for every year, but I'll enjoy it while it lasts. Competing for the ZX Spectrum we have Sabrewulf, Nightlaw, and Shadowfire. For the Commodore 64 we have Impossible Mission, Elite, and Summer Games 2. And for the Amstrad CPC we have Roland in the Caves, Nightlaw, and Way of the Exploding Fist. And since the ZX Spectrum is the top machine for the 1985 period, in fact for the entire 8-bit period here in the UK, we'll start with that. And since Sabrewulf was the top of its charts first, we'll start with Sabrewulf. Let's take a look at how it goes. So let's start with Sabrewulf, since it's the first of the 2 Ultimate games that take place in the same series. You play as Saberman, and your mission is to collect the pieces of an amulet that let you pass by the Guardian at the end of the game. Sounds simple, right? Well, think again. This game is damn hard. There are 256 rooms to explore, and almost all of them will be full to the brim with enormous monsters that seek to knock you about a bit. And I do mean knock you about. You'll get thrown across the screen like a rag doll if you're not careful. You've got a saber to defend yourself with, and the fighting animation here is really well done. The graphics are large and chunky, and while the sound is nothing to write home about, it's effective in getting the job done for such an early Spectrum game. It's not hard to see how this one became such a much-loved title. It took me a while to get the hang of Sabrewulf because I was initially playing it on keyboard like a doofus. Don't play it on keyboard, well, not unless you're intimately familiar with the way early Spectrum games avoided the standard OPQA and space controls like the plague. This game has all its controls laid out in a straight line essentially, which means that you will forever be pressing the wrong key to move unless you force yourself to become familiar with the old, non-standard layout. Don't bother. Use a joystick instead. It's much easier and it makes the game a lot of fun. And it is fun. Sabrewulf is an absolute classic. I love it and I recommend you give it a try. It's a game I can easily see myself coming back to time and time again. Next up we have Nightlaw, a game that I can't decide whether it's better to play on keyboard or joystick. Why? Because its controls are abysmal. I'm serious. To turn left, yes, turn, not move, you press Z, C, B or M. To turn right, you press X, V, N or symbol shift. I'm going to stick to Z and X for my gameplay because it's just a mangled mess if you try to go any further. You move forward by pressing A, S, D, F or any other key on that row. There is no key for moving backward, although you will quickly end up stuck in a situation where you really wish there was a back key. If you select directional controls from the main menu and also play on joystick, you can thankfully play the game like you would expect, like a normal person. Pushing the stick in any direction causes the character to move in that direction. Apparently common sense is an optional extra here. It doesn't work if you're playing on keyboard, however, so don't bother playing on keyboard. But if you do decide to jump in with the keyboard, you can jump with any key on the QWERTY line and get or drop items with the number keys. Essentially, your keys are everything down the left-hand side of the keyboard. But you can kind of bend your hands into a workable two-handed control system if you do it carefully. It's a mess though. Ultimate really need to get to grips with OP, Q, A and space. Joystick controls suck. The game is far too quick to spin you around if you do anything other than lightly tap the joystick left or right. Also, if you have a one-button joystick, and you probably do, then you're screwed if you want to try and pick up or drop an item without having to press a button on the keyboard. Good luck with that. But all these gripes about the controls aside, what is the game actually like? Well, it's groundbreaking, and I think we all know that. When Nightlaw came out, it revolutionized gaming in a big way. Isometric 3D hadn't been tried an awful lot before this game arrived, and it had certainly not looked this amazing. I love the graphics, they're brilliant. I'm just not so keen on the gameplay. I've never been the biggest fan of this style of isometric 3D graphic adventure. I played Batman a lot back in the 80s, but the isometric projection made precision platforming a pain in the neck. The random movement of the enemies always irks me because it means you can't learn the patterns and progress properly like you could in any other game. It makes gameplay tiresome and too random for me to enjoy. My opinion on these flaws has not mellowed with age. I still find these problems irksome, although thankfully I can look past them to some extent. Thankfully, playing on keyboard is far better than playing on joystick, and once you get used to the ridiculous controls, the game is decent enough to keep you going. However, it is by no means my favourite in the genre it spawned. Now I realise a lot of you may be annoyed by my take on Nightlaw. It's a game that tops many lists of great games. But maybe, for me, it's the Seinfeld effect. So many things aped its style that the original no longer seems all that great. I don't know. What I do know is that I came to games like Batman and Monster Max before I ever played this one, and as a result, I don't see the appeal of Nightlaw. Sorry guys, it's just not grabbing me. Now, Shadowfire should be a game that's right up my street. When I switched from the CPC to the PC in the early 90s, I flocked to the point-and-click adventure genre. I had adored text adventures during my 8-bit days, and I had adored graphic adventures such as Dizzy just as much. Combining the immediacy of graphic adventures with the puzzles of text adventures was just my cup of tea. Shadowfire is an early attempt to do just that. It's a point-and-click adventure game, or at least it's trying to be. Its marketing claimed it was the first text adventure game without text. It's not exactly true, since there is a space on the screen reserved for scrolling text, but it's a nice way of explaining how the game works. Essentially, you move a cursor around the lower half of the screen, clicking on icons in order to accomplish certain tasks. You'll need to consult the instructions to work out what each icon is supposed to be, however, since the game itself doesn't bother to tell you. In some instances, I got the feeling while playing the game that it was actively doing this. It's a frustrating game, and I can't say I was all that pleased playing it. The game itself takes place in real time, which adds a sense of immediacy to proceedings. According to the instructions, you have 100 minutes to complete the game. That means 100 minutes to locate the ambassador you've been sent to rescue, to capture the guy who kidnapped him, and to take control or destroy a spaceship. You can apparently do any of these in any order, and you have 6 characters to use in order to do it. The instructions then tell you the first thing you need to do is use a droid to beam down some or all of your team. And that's where I got stuck. Yes, that's right, I got stuck right at the start of the game. The reason for that is the icon system. I just don't know what any of these crude icons is supposed to be or what they're meant to do at any given time. Yes, the instructions give some basic descriptions, but it's not enough, not by a long shot. Later games pulled this icon-driven system off far better, both by severely restricting the icon set to basics such as get, drop, use, say, etc., or by dispensing with icons entirely and actually writing down what every option was, a la Monkey Island. This went for a complex series of icons that aren't well drawn enough to really show what they're supposed to do, and as a result, it's just not good. I managed to find a character selection screen, but that was pretty much just by clicking on anything that would highlight on the screen, because not all icons are active at once. But I couldn't proceed any further than that. Based on its icon-driven adventure system and the way it plays out with attacks constantly in the moment that you arrive on the enemy ship, perhaps a better comparison isn't a text adventure or a graphic adventure. Perhaps a better comparison is Laser Squad or Space Crusade, something like that. Either way, it still doesn't rival those games because it's not quite there. It's still missing something, and I'm not sure why it is, but it's definitely missing it. I like the idea of this game, but it feels like it needs a lot more playtesting and polishing to make it actually enjoyable to play. And that's a real shame, because this genre is my favourite kind of game. It's a massive disappointment. So the Spectrum didn't come off very well in this one, I'm sorry to say. We've got 2 very early attempts at new genres of gameplay, and that's to be commended. I really am impressed with how the Spectrum basically gave birth to modern gaming with a lot of key developments. But that doesn't mean the early games are always great. Sabre Wulf is brilliant. I loved it, and I was able to get into it right away. Nightlaw was acceptable despite its many flaws, and I think anyone who hasn't played the games that took what it was doing and did them better would find it a decent game. I can't do that, however, because those later games have laid Nightlaw's flaws bare to me. Sorry guys, that's just how it is. Shadowfire is in the same situation. I've seen what it was attempting done far, far better many times over. It may have been a pioneer, but now I just can't get to grips with it, and as a result, I can't recommend it. The Spectrum's title of GameHammer Top Game of 1985 therefore has to go to Sabrewulf. So it goes through to the next round. Well done, Sabrewulf. Now, what does the C64 have to offer us? I played Impossible Mission on my CPC a lot back in the 80s, and I do mean a lot. I never really managed to get anywhere with it, but I enjoyed its colourful look and its fun gameplay. The Dalek-inspired enemies are a particularly fond memory for me. Impossible Mission on the C64 is the original version, and it's obvious even at first glance. The game is bright, very nicely animated, and runs exceptionally well. This is a game that's a delight to play, and I don't mind recommending it to anyone who likes a good puzzle platformer, even if it's still a game that I can't beat. Some of the enemies are frustrating, as are some of the puzzles, but I never got the impression that it was designed to be impossible to complete despite the name of the game. You play as a secret agent who has 6 hours to stop an evil mastermind from destroying the world, or something like that. He's apparently been tampering with national security computers, and that's bad, so go and tell him to stop it. In order to get to the evil genius, you need to decrypt his control room password. The pieces to that password are scattered around his evil lair, and you start the game having already made your way inside, so at least that's all sorted. Now you just need to get past all of his Daleks, search all of his shelves and sofas and toilets apparently for the 9 pieces of the password, reassemble the password in the right order, and reach the control room. Simple. Every time you die, and you will, because this game is bastard hard, 10 minutes is knocked off your time. So that means you effectively have 35 lives at most, because if you die a 36th time, you'll be out of time. You know, I'm pretty sure I could die that many times in one room. This is a brilliant game, with a simple premise and a lot of great design. I can't recommend it enough. Speaking of games I can't recommend enough, let's take a look at Elite. Now, I never played Elite back on the BBC, its original system. I never even played it back on my beloved CPC because it came out on the Amstrad Action cover tape only a few months after I'd stopped reading the magazine. But I played Elite Plus on my PC for years, before jumping to Frontier Elite 2, Frontier First Encounters, and then, many years later, Elite Dangerous. So you could say I quite like this series. I've spent weeks of my life playing Elite, if you count up all the hours I've spent playing the various versions of the game over the years. It's one of the greatest franchises ever created, and it all comes from a very simple premise. What's the premise? Simple. Here's a spaceship. Here's a giant open-ended galaxy to do what you want in it. Have fun. That's it. Whether you decide to make money by trading, or decide to become a bounty hunter, or maybe a pirate, or simply head off to explore the galaxy, it's all up to you. There's no real end point to the game, although if you do decide to attempt to become rated elite, the game will reward you for doing so, but even then it doesn't end. So there's actually nothing stopping you becoming great at doing everything possible in this game, and I know that many people have done just that, and they no doubt had a lot of fun in the process. I certainly did. So how does the Commodore 64 version of this absolute classic game fare? In a word, brilliantly. Okay, it's not as fast as the PC version that I know and love, but let's be fair, it was never going to be. It's a faithful recreation of the BBC original, and it plays to the Commodore's strengths. Okay, it slows down here and there, especially when there's a lot going on in the space around you, and yes, there's a lot of problems with controlling the thing unless you have the manual to hand, or the wiki, but aside from those small points, Elite is one of the best space games ever made, and the C64 version stands tall beside the original. If you haven't played it already, stop what you're doing and go give it a try. You owe it to yourself to play this game. When I was a kid, we had a game for the Amstrad CPC that was colloquially known as Daley Thompson's Joystick Breaker. It was an exceptionally stupid game whose only gameplay involved hammering keys repeatedly or waggling your joystick left and right so quickly that it broke. Summer Games 2 on the C64 is Daley Thompson's Joystick Breaker for the Commodore 64. It's pretty much the same game, with the same pathetic 4 gameplay. I'm sorry if you're a fan of this old school sports title, but I am no fan of this. It's dull. It's uninspired. It has literally all been done before, and it brings nothing new to the table. How this game got to be a top seller is beyond me. It's crap. Also, it's a multi-loader, because of course it is. Every event is loaded separately, even the first one, which apparently couldn't fit into memory alongside the title screen. There is absolutely no part of this game that is worth playing. Save your time, save your joysticks, play something else. So, 2 decent games on the Commodore 64, accompanied by one pile of absolute garbage. It's tough to decide between Impossible Mission and Elite because they are both brilliant games. Summer Games 2 isn't even in the running compared to those two. On the whole, I'm going to have to go with Elite as the C64's winner. Impossible Mission is an absolute gem and I really loved playing it, but I'm sorry, how could I not choose Elite? It's a game that you can literally play forever if you so desire, and some people have been. To lose out to such a powerhouse of a game is no bad thing, so Impossible Mission fans shouldn't feel too bad about it. Okay, onto our final system. Let's take a look at the Amstrad's offerings. Now you might be wondering how a first-party title, and a launch title at that, from a widely disregarded publishing house could compete with the likes of Ultimate or even Melbourne House, who, let's face it, didn't exactly have a stellar track record of their own. Well, the truth is, if it were many of the other titles in Amsoft's lineup, this would be a 2-horse race. But it's not. We aren't talking about any old title here, we're talking about Roland in the Caves, one of the greatest titles from the early years of the Amstrad CPC. It's a well-made game with a lot of staying power. It's still widely regarded even today, and I've already reviewed it twice on GameHammer, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about it here. Suffice to say, this is a classic and it holds up strongly even after 33 years. This is a contender for the top spot on the list of CPC games for 1985, and it's a reminder that you shouldn't write off Amsoft just because it's Amsoft. In the Amstrad version of Night Law, you have the same problems that you had in the Spectrum version, only more slowly. It's a very basic specky port, and as a result, there's very little to say about it. If you like the genre, you may like this game. If you like the Spectrum version, you'll like this version. If you didn't like the specky version, you won't find anything here to make you change your mind. I didn't like the specky version. I didn't like this version. I think the game was good for us starting off on a genre that other games perfected, and for that I'm grateful, but that really is the sum total of what I have to say here. I'm sorry, let's move on. I first encountered Way of the Exploding Fist one afternoon after school. My dad had bought it at some point during the day and he'd been playing it ever since. This was a big surprise to me because he hardly ever paid attention to the family computer back then. He still doesn't even now. His interest basically extends to writing his novels and, on occasion, playing every single James Bond game ever created. Each to their own. Way of the Exploding Fist is one of the first entries into the 2D fighting genre, and it's one of those occasions where the early entries set a high bar for everything that came after. You play as one of 2 karate students, and your goal is to progress up the ranks of the dojo until you master the Way of the Exploding Fist. At least, that's the theory. In practice, you'll get a few rounds into the game before your opponent becomes too quick for you and he beats your ass back to the high score table. There are no special moves in this game, it all comes down to who can make contact with who first. Each time one of you lands a blow, the round is over and you reset to your starting positions, ready to kick ass once more. You need to land 4 blows successfully before your opponent does, which is easier said than done at the later stages of the game. It's a skilled game, and a well executed one. Movement is via the joystick, player 2 is keyboard control, but it's best to play with the joystick. And you have 8 movement options, some of which advance or retreat your character, while others block incoming attacks. All attacks are also via joystick, and are executed by holding the fire button while moving the joystick in one of 8 directions. There are kicks, punches, roundhouse kicks, jump kicks, the usual. The move list is basic, and as I said earlier, there are no special moves to make the characters differ from one another. It's basic karate, and it's actually not bad. I used to play this game a lot as a kid because I was really into karate and studied it for many years. That's how I'm aware that most of the skill level progression is missing from the game. But to be fair, it wouldn't actually change anything if all the various coloured belts were included. The game isn't all that fast, but that's a good thing as well because it better replicates real karate sparring at a dojo. Like I said, I used to play this game a lot and even my dad liked it, which makes it a standout game in my book because he isn't a gamer and he rarely showed interest in games. So I would recommend this one, especially if you're a one-on-one fighting fan with an interest in the early days of the genre. So it all comes down to this: Roland in the Caves, Night Law, or Way of the Exploding Fist. A launch title, a game that launched an entire genre, and an early contender in a genre that is still much loved to this day. It's a tough choice. Roland in the Caves is a brilliant game. It's an oft-acknowledged classic and a firm favourite of many CPC aficionados. Similarly, Night Law launched a plethora of classic games that are still much loved to this day. But for me, the title has to go to Way of the Exploding Fist. This game is brilliant. It brings in people who wouldn't normally play games, like my dad, and it's a delight to play even today. Its simple controls and simple mechanics mask a skillful, yet delightfully easy to get to grips with game. I'm a big fan, and that's why it's going to take the CPC slot in the next round. So, here we are at the end. It's been a long haul with many games to play, but at last we have reached the final round. One game from each system has made it through this far. One challenger which will hold the torch for its format. Step forward, contenders. Representing the ZX Spectrum we have Saberwolf. For the Commodore 64 we have Elite. And for Team Amstrad we have Way of the Exploding Fist. Now these are all fine games, and if you play them you'll see why they are so well regarded. This is a tough decision, and it's not one that I've made lightly. Saberwolf is an absolute delight to play. It's fast-paced, it's action-heavy, it's graphically impressive, especially for the time, and I love it to bits. I'll probably go and play it after I've finished making this video. Way of the Exploding Fist is an essential game to play if you're a fan of the fighting genre. It may not be able to hold up against something like Street Fighter 2, but for this time in gaming, and on the 8-bit systems as well, it's a brilliant game and a worthy addition to any collection. And Elite is a classic that stands above other classics. It's the godfather of the open world games, an early perfecter of the first-person combat sim, and a game that you will never have to stop playing because if you're willing to let it, it will go on forever. But we can only have one winner, so let's make our decision. In third place, taking the bronze, we have Way of the Exploding Fist. It's a classic. It's a brilliant and skillful game, but sadly it can't quite match the other two. In second place, taking home the silver, it's Saberwolf, a superb arcade action game that's a little different every time you play, and consequently it has a lot of replay value. Which means that first place and the gold must go to Elite. The classic of classics takes our first GameHammer Game of the Year award. Well done, Elite. Take a bow. That was a tough one. 9 games on 3 systems, all whittled down to one winner. It's been a lot of tough work making this episode, but I hope you have enjoyed it. And I hope that you understand that although we did generate the list of candidates by looking at the charts of the past, what really came down to it in the end was whether the game still stood up to the test of time and whether it played well now. I have tried to be as honest and open-minded as I could with these games. They all deserved a fair shot, and I did that to the best of my ability. But in the end, it came down to 3 classics, and I had to choose one of those, and that means disappointing a few people, I know that. It's just the way of things. It's the nature of the beast with this kind of award. But anyway, whether you agree with the final result or not, I hope you did enjoy the episode. And if you did, remember to click that like button, share this with your friends so that they'll know a good game when they see it. Do subscribe for future videos, because there will be more in the future. But until next time, I've been Zoe Kirk-Robinson, you've been watching GameHammer on the Knobmouse channel, and I'll see you next time. But for now, I'm going off to play the GameHammer Game of the Year 1985, Elite. See you later. Today's video is brought to you by my graphic novels, The Collected Life of Naughty Mouse, Volume 1, All Over the House, Volume 1, and All Over the House, Volume 2. Thank you.